Welcome, everybody. It is 6:30 on Monday, February 28th, and I want to welcome you to the town hall on Indigenous people and the land. I'm really excited to have everybody here this evening. The panel conversation is being brought to you by the Anti-Racism Task Force and Grand Valley's Kauffman Institute. So if you have an opportunity to thank the members of the task force, the organizations that make that up, please do so. I do have to issue a little bit of a warning. We have been Zoom bombed in the past. We believe that all of the security measures are in place the best they can be, but we can't guarantee 100% that nobody can follow the link to get in. For that reason, we have somebody working security, and if anybody were to behave inappropriately, we would remove them as soon as possible. So I just need to put that warning out there so you know there's not a 100% fail-safe uh, cure here, but we believe that you will be well protected. Again, this is from our series from the Anti-Racism Task Force, talking about race and racism. There are other things that the task force is accomplishing. These are a few of those things. We have a very robust resource list, so I recommend that you refer to that. In the packet after our event tonight, you'll be getting all of these materials, including the link to the resource list. We do have a community book club that is led by Wes McGee that everybody's invited to participate in. There's opportunities to share your reflections and your actions so that you recognize and others recognize that we are all part of a community of people who are engaged in these conversations and engaged in these actions, that we are more than the sum of our individual beings. And as we come together, we have more and more impact. We've been supporting county DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We've created window clings, which are placed throughout businesses and homes. And we're inviting people to participate in a long talk. A Long Talk has partnered with us. We've provided their training specifically in our geography, and you can participate in that and then engage in the pillars of change, a really robust way to continue these conversations. And we've also now put together our civil rights road trip, a trip to the Museum of Peace and Justice and other civil rights sites. We're taking reservations for that trip now. March 15th is the deadline. So I just want to invite you to consider participating in that very meaningful, life-changing opportunity to be uncomfortable. We're going to start here with our statement from the county.
Reconocemos la importancia de la diversidad, la equidad y la inclusión en el logro de nuestra misión y lo consideramos un valor básico para involucrarnos de manera proactiva y comprender una variedad de perspectivas a través de todas las diferencias humanas. Buscamos asegurar un trato respetuoso y justo y el mismo acceso a oportunidades y recursos para que todas las personas puedan prosperar y alcanzar su máximo potencial. Creemos que la voz de cada persona agrega valor.
We recognize the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the accomplishment of our mission, and we hold it as a basic value to proactively engage and understand a variety of perspectives across all human differences. We seek to ensure respectful, fair treatment, and full, equal access to opportunities and resources so all people may thrive and achieve their full potential. We believe every person's voice adds value.
So that is the statement of belonging, the DEI statement from Ottawa County. And now as we begin our time together, we pause to acknowledge the land on which we gather. We recognize the people of the three fires, the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, on whose land we are gathered. The Three Fires people are indigenous to this land, which means that this is their ancestral territory. Every university, congregation, institution, business, and monument here in West Michigan is built on stolen native land. We are guests on their land, and one way to practice right relations is to develop genuine ways to acknowledge the histories and traditions of the people who originated here first, who are still here, and to tend to the land always. As we make this land acknowledgement, we know it is but an important first step, and that there are many more that we need to take when we decide to engage in the important work of social justice and equity. One of those steps is to convene this conversation on Indigenous people and the land. Our speakers tonight include Eric Hemingway, Levi Rickert, and Kevin Locke. And we are so privileged to have them each as speakers and panelists tonight. We do have some instructions we go over, or this is rather the agenda. We get together, we have some instructions, and then we'll hear from each of our panelists. They'll each have 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll have an opportunity for question and answer. We'll then go into our breakout sessions, our small groups, and then we'll come back to report on the conversations in those small groups, and we'll have some polling questions before we talk about next steps. A few instructions. Please stay on mute unless you are asked to turn your volume on as a panelist or a facilitator. Closed captioning is available. You can turn your subtitles on if you choose to. We ask that you submit your questions and your comments through the chat box. We did receive questions ahead of time, and those are ready to be asked and answered. But as other questions arise in you during this conversation tonight, please enter them in the chat box. In order to participate in the breakout sessions, you do need to have the Zoom app downloaded. You can't just do that from your browser, so hopefully you've already downloaded the app. And then we do ask, if possible, that you keep your camera on. It just builds that sense of trust when we can see each other. As far as next steps, we are recording this town hall, and we will send the recording along with the slides, Q&A, any materials that get discussed tonight. We'll send that out to all of the people who've registered. And finally, we go over our communication guidelines and rules. The first one is honesty. We don't get together to debate. This isn't about being right or being wrong, but about communicating honestly, to be able to share our experience, our thoughts, and our beliefs, and to be willing to listen to the experiences, thoughts, and beliefs of others. Equality, that while we have incredible guest speakers with us today, we all are equal and valuable contributors to the conversation. We want to practice active listening, which can be particularly challenging in a virtual format. But rather than thinking about what we want to say, we really want to try to give the person speaking our full attention and practice active listening. We want to take responsibility for what we feel and for what we say. All of us have hot buttons, and they can get pressed unintentionally. So if that happens, we want to be able to name it without blaming anybody else for it. We also, and I skipped respect, we all come with preconceived ideas, and those can get in the way of our listening to each other. So we want to be aware of that so that we can remain respectful at all times. And finally, we really work to create a shame-free zone, a place where we can talk about our thoughts and ask the questions that we haven't known where to ask, share things that we haven't known where to share, so that we can unpack them and look at them more objectively and decide, is this something I want to continue to carry with me or not? So we really want to meet people where they are and refrain from shaming. Shame never leads to healthy change. It only pushes destructive things further under the surface. So this is a shame-free zone. We're going to and I do like to say, if you're not comfortable with those ground rules, this would probably be a good time to excuse yourself from this particular conversation and come back again when you're ready to embrace the ground rules for the good of the group. Uh, I'm assuming everybody still on is interested in pursuing this conversation. So we're going to start with a pre-poll, just two questions, and they're in the same question. You just have to scroll down. One is about your level of confidence talking about race and racism on a scale of 1 to 10. And the second one is how present is racism in our community from not at all to always? And if you would just answer those two questions and then hit the submit button, that'll give us a sense of where we are starting tonight as a community engaged in conversation. We'll leave that up for about another 10 seconds as I see the answers coming in. Please make sure you hit the submit button. And I'll close this question in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me share those results with you. So you'll see that most of the folks on the conversation tonight have some degree of comfort talking about racism. In the second question, about 69% see racism as something that's always present because it's a systemic issue, 24% regularly. We'll ask those questions again after our conversation today. And with that, I want to get into the heart of our conversation. I want to introduce Eric Hemingway. And I am not the best pronouncer of words, which is kind of why I skipped your tribal affiliations as we were beginning, but I'm going to do my best. Anishinaabe, Ottawa, am I close? All right, Eric, if you would go ahead and unmute yourself, and you have the next 10 minutes.
All right. Well, first I'd like to say miigwech. It roughly translates into thank you of our native language of Anishinaabe for having the opportunity to share. I'm going to try to give a traditional introduction of myself. It helps center, my train of thought and where the conversation is going to go. Ganabik and Disnakas, Onomaticomek and Donjiba, Anishinaabe, Odawa, Endau, and Jijak Dodem, Jinagay, Archives and Records for the Waganuk Sing, Odawak, and Gitchendum, Manda, Dibkak to Mandoki, Minwa, Minobaban, Ziwan, Minwa, and Jinikian, Nangwa. So one of my native names is a snake. My English name is Eric Hemingway. I self-identify as an Anishinaabe Odawa. I am from the place of the prayer tree, AKA Cross Village, Michigan, on the shores of Lake Michigan, between Harbor Springs and Mackinac. I am of the Crane clan, and I am the director of Archives and Records for the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians, one of 12 federally recognized tribes here in the state of Michigan. And I'm very happy to be here tonight to share my work and my life, because they pretty much have totally intersected at this point. So I want to say miigwech for that. So thinking about Indigenous people in the land, I'm going to tell a little story. That's how I was brought up to help kind of relay messages and ideas through story. So tell a little story about myself growing up in Cross Village. It's a very small rural community. It still is to this day. I grew up in Cross Village with my mom and my grandma and my aunt, uncles, and sister and cousins, and very typical native home. A lot of people coming and going. It was a very magical time for me. I'm glad I grew up in that time with those people. And I was going to my friend's house one day, another Odawa family, and I didn't have a car at the time. I was 14, 15, and I was riding my bike to my friend's house, and I took a shortcut and I cut down this 2-track road. And as I was going down the 2-track, I seen one of our tribal elders in the cemetery, and he was there. And this is pre, I guess, federal reaffirmation or federal recognition for the tribe. So we didn't have a lot of resources at the time. And so there's Dean in the cemetery with his own truck, his own lawnmower, his own equipment. And he was mowing the grass of this very, very old Odawa cemetery. And once he seen me pedaling by, he stopped and he started waving me over. and I knew I was in for a talking. So of course I'm not going to say no to Dean. So I went up to him and I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "You see what I'm doing?" I go, "Yeah, you're mowing the grass." He goes, "That's only part of it. I'm taking care of my people. There's my mom, there's my dad, my brother's over there, and one day I'm going to be right next to them." And I knew, he was more than just a talking to. And he goes, "Where are you going?" And I go, "Oh, I didn't want to say," because he knew I was up to no good. So, because I know where you're going, and just, try to, keep a lid on it, and, don't get in trouble. But he goes, "At some point, who's going to take care of me?" And then he went back on his little lawnmower and rode away and started mowing the grass. So it was a really strong impression that, this has to be handed down. This is a sacred place, a special place. Fast forward, 20 plus years, and part of my duties with my job at the tribe as director of archives is caretaking for cemeteries. So I go out with my truck and my, the equipment for the tribe has, and then I take care of some, I mow grass, fix crosses, remove limbs. And I go to that cemetery in Cross Village on Oak Drive, and there's Dean. And I make sure, I talk to him and say, "Look, I'm here, and, I got you. Thank you for helping me out and telling me this. And I'm just waiting for some kid to pedal by on a bike so I can say, 'Hey, get over here.' I'm getting older now. So who's going to take care of me?" It hasn't happened yet. Usually on dirt bikes or something, they go by really fast. So it was a real strong moment about land and how land is connected to not just one generation but multiple generations, and that we take care of it through our actions. And when I first started my job for the tribe, for Little Traverse Bay Bands, I was 29 years old, and just I had a background in some history. And one of the first things I got involved with for the tribe was doing repatriation. That's the return of people under the federal law of NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And I didn't know anything about the law, but I knew all about, taking care of ancestors. I've been doing this, and we go to what we call a Feast of the Dead or G-By Supper. It's what we call a ghost supper where we feed our ancestors every fall. Something we do without compromise. I mean, even through the COVID years, the family still gets together and they have a private supper if need be, to feed the ancestors. It's not just thinking about them, it's you actually feeding them on the other side. So that's always been there, but this opportunity arose to take it in a different direction with repatriation. And so without hesitation, I said, of course I want to do this work. I just got to figure out what it is. And so I immersed myself in what repatriation is under the law. There's a federal law, and Indians have laws, more laws than any other population. We have laws for our children, for the land, for our religion, for our ancestors. It's just one of many laws. And so I got to learn what the law was and got to the point where I felt comfortable enough to start to implement it on behalf of Little Traverse Bay Bands. So contacting museums who have ancestral human remains and working through the process to get them returned. But it was a difficult road at times because I got to see the oppression. I got to see the racism in the records that, natives from across all of Turtle Island, from Alaska to Florida and everywhere in between, in Hawaii especially, people were going in and they were taking ancestors and they were selling them and they were using them as artwork, or they were just using them as novelties and scientific study. And it was all based on them being native. That was the main reason that they were being exploited, that they were being dug up out of the ground. And this was happening by tens of the thousands. And so we, took it to heart that we had to go and get our ancestors back, no matter how old they are. So we've worked to get ancestors back that are 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old. And one of the museums I was working with said, "How do you know this person is related to you?" And I automatically reverted to when I was a child and going to ghost suppers and taking care of graveyards and people reinforcing that through time, that this is our land, these are our people, and we take care of both of them. You can't separate the two. They're inseparable. So it's that oral tradition that, and I don't want to say just stories, but it's beliefs and heritage and everything that goes into that, passed down from generation to generation, that is reinforced through action, through interacting with your community, which like I said, I was very lucky to grow up in this environment. I like to say we were poor in money, but rich in community. And that's just the way it was. And that's just the way it had to be. So working through this law, I got to see, this really different type of racism in relation to land, that, our burials weren't being protected, that our people weren't being protected. that we had to have this law enacted in 1990. It's a pretty late law that says that any federal institution or federal agency or any institution that's received federal funding, they have to return these people. And I shy away from the term artifacts or collections. That's a alien term for a lot of tribal people. These are ancestors. Ganigani Jik. I had to start learning some language to do this stuff, and because as one of my elders said, they don't understand English, so you got to start talking to them in the language. And so I started to try to learn words that I needed to learn. And Ganigani Jik is, in my translation, the ones who walk before you. Because going to these museums and retrieving them, we talk to them to say, hey, we're here and we want to honor you and treat you right, do good by you, and bring you back and put you back into the land. So we've been doing this. I no longer do this work for the tribe. Another individual is taking up the reins, but I'm still working, telling stories. So I do a lot of work in public history with exhibits and signage and school curriculums, and just getting the word out there. But these stories always revert back for me about land and how Native people are represent 1% of the population to this very day. But 500 years ago, we were 100% of the population. And when you're that small minority, it's really hard to get your story out, but it's still there. And this isn't an easy story, but it's a real story. It's a truthful story. And I'm just glad that, we're here to be able to share it.
Eric, thank you very much. Very much appreciate your sharing the story. Our next speaker is Levi Rickert from the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. Levi, if you would unmute yourself.
Good evening, and thank you, Barbara. I'm Levi Rickert. I'm a tribal citizen of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation, and I am the publisher, editor of Native News Online. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, so I'm close to many of you watching tonight. And I feel honored to be part of this panel tonight. It's such an important topic, Indigenous people in the land. And I'll say this, Eric and I have, I had a lot of respect for what Eric does up at the tribe. Last summer, we were talking about the Indian boarding schools and his tribe. Actually, the Harbor Springs boarding school was up there. So Native News Online has been doing a lot of work associated with the Indian boarding schools. So, but I'm happy to be here tonight. And Barbara, thank you for that land acknowledgement. I will say this, that many times in public venues now, not all sporting events, but some sporting events, graduations at universities, people will acknowledge the land, and we are in the land of the people of three fires, and I am Potawatomi, so I really respect that. And the land acknowledgement is I know a publication from up north did an article a week or so ago, and Martin Reinhardt, who's a professor up at Marquette, was interviewed, and I think Jamie Stuck from the Huron Potawatomi was part of that interview, and the importance of land acknowledgement is I think pretty significant, because it all of a sudden people are being aware of that we still exist. Now let me be clear about that. If you look at American history, Native Americans tend to fall off around 1890, around Wounded Knee of 1890, and maybe the end of the what they called the Indian Wars. And our ancestors, Eric's, mine, and my family here in Michigan is the White Pigeon family, and there's a little town down by Sturgis named White Pigeon. It was named after our ancestor. Several great grandfathers ago, but Wamini. And so with that, we just feel like being tied to our land of who we are. This has been, I know where my great grandfather is buried, okay? And it's that sense of belonging. And Vine Deloria, who is actually a American Indian scholar who passed away 15 years ago or thereabouts, he used to write books about time and place, and you could insert the word land for place, and some of the legal Indian scholars write about how when during the 1950s. And some of it may even predated that, but there's a big program by the federal government called relocation program. It was a policy where they went to reservations and basically told Native people, we're going to send you to cities. And various people from Oklahoma or other tribes around the United States and would put them in metropolitan areas such as Chicago, San Francisco, Denver, and on and on. And what happened was the studies showed that the Native people, when they got there, they really felt out of place. They felt completely removed from their culture because in many cases, Native people will have their places. The traditionalist Indians, Native people, and you'll excuse me, some people like to correct me when I say Indian, but I was brought up in India, so I still use that term. I use them interchangeably, and you'll hear me use Indigenous, American Indian, Indian, or Native American. But the old traditionalist Native people would say that would literally have places. They may go to a certain rock. They didn't necessarily go to church like Christians do, where they go on Sundays and sit in the same pew every week for 30 or 40 years. But our traditionalists who practice ceremonial practices would maybe have a certain rock on a mountain that they would go to and pray and perform their ceremonies and feel connected to the creator, the universe. And when they were removed and taken to the cities, they lost that sense of place, that sense of belonging, the sense of land where they knew. As I said, I know where my great grandfather is buried, and literally Wamimi down in Sturgis, there's a monument there for him. And so that's really important to us. I know a lady that retired from the juvenile district court or juvenile court here in Kent County years ago, and she was moving back to Bishabitown. That's the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa Indians. And she said she had to go back to the land where her relatives, her ancestors lived. It was really important to her. So she and her husband literally sold their house here in the Grand Rapids area, built a house up on the reservation, and gave her the sense of belonging once again. And she has since passed away, but I always remember that story. And as I was thinking about words for tonight's preparation, is the idea that we so often we really tie ourselves to the land and in that sense of belonging. But in something else I'll say, in some land acknowledgements, and Deb Holland, who is the first American Indian to sit in a presidential cabinet in the secretarial role. She's Laguna Pueblo, and she is the Secretary of the Interior. In her land acknowledgements, she usually references the land and waterways. Now think about where we are here in Michigan, with surrounded by the Great Lakes, which are what, 22% of the world's fresh water. Well, the water is precious to Native people. That's what Standing Rock was all worried, was concerned about, what, 5-6 years ago now. It was the idea water is life, and that was the mantra. Winnie Wiconi, meaning that water is life. And so think about when you land acknowledgements. I really like that Secretary Holland uses waterways, because here in this state, so much of our land, so much of our water is now polluted. I mean, here just in Rockford, Michigan, with the chemicals from one of the factories up there, contamination. And so when you think about it, the land acknowledgements, not just the land, but the waterways, and think about climate change and the environment, protection of that, how we as Native people are trained and brought up to protect Mother Earth for the next 7 generations. That's pretty significant. I surely wish the people in Washington, D.C. would think in terms of 7 generations when they think about making policies and laws for the United States. How much better we would all be if they thought about 7 generations instead of the selfishness so often that some political people operate in. What's in it for them now? Where's the money and all that? But back to this, if you think more in the universal sense of how Native people think, the land and protection of land. And in recent years, Native News Online has covered some of the stories of how certain tribes are literally buying land back. So they have a land base. So tribes in California, there's a tribe in, I think it was the Southern Ute out in Colorado. Some young man who inherited some land. I can't remember how many acres it was, but he literally gave it to the tribe. Said, "Here, it's yours. This belongs to you." He didn't really have any need for it. What a cool gesture. What a nice gesture. And I was talking to a lady today. We had a live stream earlier, and after the meeting, she was talking about, I was telling her about this presentation tonight, and she said, "Yeah, the land." She said, "I had to buy some land just so I could feel a sense of belonging." That a church up in her tribe in Washington State owned it, and she said she bought it back so that it could be in her family once again and have the sense of land. One cool story that I covered last year in Chicago. It was kind of a land back story where a lot of people don't realize this, but the Great Fire of the 1800s in Chicago, that it was Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocked over the lantern and the city burned. Well, the debris from that was pushed literally into Lake Michigan. And so there are records that the Potawatomi did not cede the land, or excuse me, the waterway. They had land, but so one tribe, the Potawatomi, maintained that certain parts of Chicago were never ceded to the United States by the Potawatomi. So from Michigan Avenue, I want to say down by Roosevelt, by Columbia College down there in Chicago, eastward from Michigan Avenue all the way to the lake, which is now land, basically landfill. The Potawatomis believe up to like the Chicago River, that's their land. And so last year, it was part of a community art project. And I went down and covered it in October, and literally they took these chalk markers like you use on a baseball field, but they use red sand and they put it right down the sidewalk, eastern side of Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And just to show that that land east of there belonged to the Potawatomi. And what a cool thing. As I'm Potawatomi, it kind of gave me chills watching it happen. Then I went down there and across at the river, right where Lower Wackeris and Michigan Avenue, there's a big mural that said, "This is Potawatomi land." And I have to tell you, as a Potawatomi man, I got the chills up and down my spine standing there watching that, because the idea, and oftentimes, and I appreciate what Eric was talking about, our ancestors. We think about our ancestors often, about those who came before us, the struggles that they went through. And here we are today. What an opportunity to really have conversations such as this, to talk about who we are as Native people, Indigenous people, and what the land and the waterways mean to us. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Barbara. Thank you. Miigwech.
Levi, thank you so very much. Appreciate all of your statements. I don't want to take up time myself. I want to get on to the next speaker. So I want to introduce Kevin Locke from Standing Rock. Kevin, if you would unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, very good. I'd like to especially acknowledge my esteemed co-panelists, and then all of the listeners there, all the participants, and then of course I think you mentioned the Kauffman Foundation. And before I forget, I wanted to mention to Mr. Rickard that 50 years ago, I was a student at Haskell, and one of my buddies was from Mayetta, from the Prairie Band, just close by, north of Topeka. And we used to go there 4 times a year. They have the drum ceremony. And we used to go up there. That was 50 years ago. So they had a little way down this dirt road, not in Mayetta, but kind of out in the country. They had the meeting place for the drum. They call it drum religion. but it was really fantastic. I really love going there. They have at that time, and I don't know anything about it since 50 years ago, but they had 8 drums. They had 6 right there at Mayetta, the Potawatomi, and they had 2 from Horton, Kickapoo. And one of the real cool things about it was all older people there. And there's no English, 0 English was allowed inside the meeting house, no English. And so then occasionally you could go out, and then I'd ask questions, about what was going on, because I don't understand Potawatomi at all. But because they sing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs over 4 days, hundreds of songs that go with each drum. And I asked them, what are those songs about? They said, well, through all the clans that we have, they're establishing relationship with all of creation, making relationship with all of creation. And then for a lot of the songs that they had, the older people asked me where I was from. I told them South Dakota. They said, well, this whole way of life, it comes from the Dakota people. They said tail feather woman. Tail feather woman that was the one that brought it. So that's why they had songs in there, and I had to get up and dance for quite a few. But anyway, I could go on and on, but it was really fantastic. But each of the drums, they had a pipe that goes with it. There's a pipe, and they before each of they start, they load that pipe and they pray with each one. And so I'd like to say a little prayer as an acknowledgement here, and I'll say it in English. I do speak my own language. I'm 68 years old, and when I was younger, we had a lot of the people in my community. I'm from Wakapala at Standing Rock, and a lot of the people, we had a lot of monolingual people, no English at all. So it was pretty cool. I'm glad I have that. But I'll say this in English. Grandfather above, we acknowledge the holy ones you have sent upon this land to kindle the sacred fire in the hearts of us, your grandchildren. We are eternally grateful that in ancient times you have sent the peacemaker, white buffalo calf woman, breath maker, sweet medicine, and a myriad others to breathe holiness and beauty upon this turtle island and your grandchildren here, and to teach us your laws and to enable us to draw close to you, and especially to love and cherish our relative, Grandmother Earth, and all that dwell upon her. In particular, we acknowledge the holy ones you have sent to the spot upon which we stand, and the nations and kindreds who have been the custodians of that sacred trust. We ask that you breathe upon and fan the embers of the fire of love and faith in our hearts and minds, that our footsteps may tread your path, and we may restore peace and order upon this blessed land. So I wanted to say that because from my observation, this is one thing that the people always do, is that they always acknowledge the holy ones that have walked upon this land. I know that the pilgrims are different people when they arrive on the eastern shores of our beautiful island. The people who receive them out there, out east upon the shores, they always would make these kind of acknowledgements. They'd always kindle a fire. And that fire, of course, represents the faith, the covenant, the relationship we have with one above, Kichimanitu or Wakantanka, however we say that in our own language. They always acknowledge that. And I think that perhaps initially, maybe still, I don't know, the immigrant people who came here, they thought, oh, those Indians, they're praying to that mountain, or they're praying to that eagle, they're praying that way. But in reality, it's not that at all. What it is that it's a principle, and that is that everything in the contingent world, the world we experience with our senses, everything in the world is a physical manifestation of a spiritual reality. So the idea is the creation is not separate like the spiritual worlds and the physical world. It's all the handiwork of one creator, one fashioner. It's just that the laws apply at different levels. So in other words, everything in this physical world is a counterpart to something in the spiritual worlds beyond. But we don't have access to that. The only thing we have access to is this physical creation that we have. So therefore, you know, like in the past, Mr. Indian, Mrs. Indian, whoever they are, they don't, it's not like they're praying to that mountain, but that mountain is emblematic of a divine attribute, maybe majesty. They're not praying to that eagle, but that eagle represents maybe nobility or the ascendant nature of the human spirit. So you get where I'm going with that. And so this is what we have, this relationship. And the relationship was established by these holy ones. I'm not too familiar with, you know, exactly about the Three Fires people. My mom's dad was from Red Lake, Minnesota. He was born 1887. And I remember when I was a little kid, I remember him, and he was very prayerful, very devout man. But again, he prayed all in Ojibwe, Anishinaabe Moen. And I kind of forgot, I can't speak that language now. I think I understood it when I was really young, but I don't now. But anyway, they always acknowledged that spiritual foundation to these holy ones that walked upon this earth. They gave these laws, and they gave many laws. And you see that these are continually invoked. And I'll mention a few of them. And the co-panelists, they mentioned this also. And one of them is this whole idea of basing our consultation and our prayers and our actions upon how they affect not just ourselves and our family, but all of creation. And not just now, but even maybe 4 to 7 generations into the future. You have to think about all these things when you gather in consultation. Another real principle is that the people are always child-centered. We have to think about our young ones and future generations. Another thing is that we have to always think about, I'll mention this, is that if you notice Indians, whenever they have a meeting of any kind, doesn't matter what it is, what happens first? It's the prayer. Prayer goes first. Everything has to be founded on that prayer, who's ever in charge. And I noticed this, especially as I interact in the non-Indian world, that's not necessarily a value. With Indigenous people, it is. They always think that. And another thing you notice is that Indigenous people, the value is that everything has to be alcohol-free. This is, I think, of all populations on the planet, the Indigenous people here in North America emphasize this to the utmost, is that nothing, the alcohol and all these substances, they don't mix with anything traditional. It's totally has no part of that at all. Has no part of that at all. You have to be clear-minded. Your heart has to be clear. And so I wanted to say these kind of things. I know that I want to respect our 10-minute time frame here. So I think I'm at 9 minutes right now. So I like to do everything a little bit early if I can. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to our moderator with all respect to the co-panelists and all the participants here. Thank you very much. Chimig Glitch and Lila Opila Tanke Chicha Pinaha. Echegla Pachi, Echitualo. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. What a delightful set of panelists tonight. I just want to dive in. So I'm going to turn things over to Mary Jane, who will lead us in a question and answer period. I know a couple of people have put questions in the chat. Please go ahead if you have questions and enter those now.
We have some excellent questions. The first one goes to Eric. Can you tell us a little bit about what schools you're working with around curriculum of Indigenous people?
Sure. Primarily working with the closest schools, Harbor Springs Public School I've been working with for about 10 years. And I actually graduated from Harbor Springs. So it's a little personal, you could say, to go back to my old school where I didn't learn anything about natives whatsoever. We talked about natives for maybe a half a day, and it was always Plains natives, and that was it. So got a little bit of personal to go back in and let's talk about natives in our own backyard. So the public schools in Northern Michigan, I work with some universities, Michigan State University, University of Michigan, do guest talks here and there, but primarily it's schools in Northern Michigan.
Thank you. This next question is for Levi, and if you can certainly call on the other panelists if you'd like. Someone's wondering if there's any measures in place for the people to return their land and the structures on it to the Indigenous people of the area in their will.
I don't know any one particular case, and I always jokingly tell people that if you want to give me Mackinac Island with a group of my people, I will take you with all the improvements, and you'll never have to hear from me again. It's a joke, but no, seriously, I don't think that there is. I think that in the case in Colorado, as I recall, it was willed to him by his parents, and he decided upon himself that the gesture would be to give it to the tribe. So I don't know, Eric and Mr. Locke, if you know of any situations.
The next question. Oh, go ahead.
No, I haven't, but I know there's mechanisms in place, and that if an individual is looking to seek that out, I would encourage that person to contact the tribal governments. And tribes are sovereigns. They have their own leadership. They have their own constitutions and laws and how they have jurisdiction over their members. And part of that government is managing land. So if you are like really serious about it, just contact. There's over 500 tribes in the United States. So you can, from Alaska and even the Native Hawaiian organizations, NHOs. So I would contact the tribes directly.
So the important thing is it's possible. The next question is for Kevin. How can we promote sacred reciprocity on Earth?
How can we promote sacred reciprocity on Earth? Well, one of the themes that I was mentioning was these holy ones that walked upon this earth, and they all elucidated universal principles, the golden rule. And those rules they don't change, they're immutable. They're the same for all people on the planet, these holy ones that have visited all places. So that's one place to start. That would be like interfaith. But in order for that to really begin to mature and happen, people have to begin to recognize the spiritual heritage of this half of the planet. I'm talking about the Western Hemisphere. And so far, the immigrant populations have not done this. And so that's a good starting place right there, I think, is to focus on these divine laws, spiritual laws that require this theme of reciprocity that you mentioned.
Thank you. The next question is for Eric. Eric, might you have any suggestions for anthropologists who may be against repatriation for reasons of science, where new techniques can make one discover new things about the culture?
I can give you my opinion. It's going to differ, but that the law is in place for a reason. This is Indian law, and this is a law that touches on civil rights, human rights, and humanity. And in my mind, this outweighs the possibilities of scientific theories. If you want to know about Native people, talk to Native people. You don't have to go into their graves and remove them and measure skulls and bones and see what food they ate, because you can talk to the people, and people, I jokingly say, you want to know what Odawa ate 1,000 years ago, it was fish and corn and some berries, and if somebody got lucky they shot a deer, but it was fish. And it's no surprise, we live in the Great Lakes. You don't have to go into the graves. So this has been an age-old argument with repatriation ever since the law was created. about the loss of science and, that we're losing all this knowledge, but it's a very one-sided view of information. You're not, accepting and you're neglecting the viewpoint of Native people. And within the law itself, it says that Native oral traditions holds the same credibility as Western science. And this is one of the only laws that states that. And we as Native people have known this for, since time immemorial, that, our information has that type of credibility. It's still going on to this day.
Mary Jane, may I say something as well? Thank you.
Certainly.
It's been said that over 500,000, think about that, 500,000, 500,000 Indigenous bones have been under care of museums, university, libraries, science, however you want to say it. Enough is enough. And they don't need any more bones to study. And I agree with what Eric said. And I really like what he just said about about our knowledge. And Deb Holland actually kind of introduced it at the White House Tribal Summit this past fall. And it's been said, it's been called Indigenous Intelligence or Indigenous Knowledge, and probably interchangeable. But there's really something to be said about some of the values of what we know as Native people. Pharmaceutical companies have ripped us off for a long time with some of the use of the plants that our ancestors have used to heal themselves. And I'm happy that there's some really, MIT's working on something right now. There's a project going at the University of Michigan we're going to report on in April. And so I'm so happy that this finally coming to the forefront. And I'm happy that Secretary Holland pushed it last I think it was November at the White House Tribal Summit, Indigenous Intelligence. So thank you.
Thank you. This next question is for Kevin. Many people, Indigenous and others, have been deeply wounded and hurt by religions, ideologies, and people representing them. How do people collectively and individually heal from that trauma?
Yeah, there is really a lot of hurt, a lot of trauma from violence. You can see that happening right now as we speak over in Ukraine and Europe, and we all come from this kind of a heritage, and we have to process this. And I know that currently, this is the big issue in the United States, and I think that's kind of a focus of the whole initiative that you are doing here, which is, of course, the tip of the arrowhead here in the United States, especially, is black-white issues. But one of the things I always reflect on is the fact that just because of U.S. history, especially U.S. history, we've all have this these real bad roles that we have to play out, that our ancestors played out, such as, we can think of like the enslaved, the enslavers, the conquered, the conquerors, the exploited, the exploiters, and it goes on and on, all these roles, puts us all in a really bad position. But somehow we have to all envision positive roles for ourselves and step up to the plate, because we are living in a time now when we have this collective role to write our own future. We have to write our own our collective future. And the only way we can do that is to spiritualize ourselves, first of all, and then to see ourselves as proactive agents and also our families and our communities as well. So we can take this kind of local action. And this is what I think what a lot of people recognize what happened at Standing Rock, as was mentioned, like several years ago, with the water protection that was initiated there. So now that kind of diffused out, but it's all part of this healing process, which is very complex, and I can't really, I could talk about it, but that's about the best I could say right for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Levi. Could you tell us a little bit about the boarding schools that the Indigenous people were forced to go to in Michigan?
Well, and Eric can chime in as well because he's right up there in Harbor Springs. But there were three known ones that I know about. The Mount Pleasant Industrial School that operated until like 1931. There was one in Baraga that was operated by a church. It was actually called a mission, not so much an Indian boarding school, back in the 1800s. And the one at Harbor Springs, Holy Childhood, which closed, as I recall, was it 1984, Eric? I think my memory serves me right. So we have three, and I'll just say this: it was a dark chapter in American history. Notice I didn't say American Indian history; it's American history. The idea that our children were taken from homes and put in boarding schools where they were not able to speak their language. They were not able to learn interpersonal relationships with their parents because they were moved far from their families in many cases. And so there's a lot that was lost. And actually, let's take that, strike the word lost. Let's say stolen from us, language. And it's our responsibility now to go get it back. The idea of our family structure was very strong prior to European contact. That was stripped from us, but it's for us to go get it back. And I'll say this, that I'm really happy that our governor has put into the budget $500,000 one-time appropriation that will study the boarding schools here in the state of Michigan. And it's, I think there's a report back to the governor's office February of 2024. Obviously, it's just that the budget stage has not been approved by the legislature, so it's not law yet. But the Michigan Department of Civil Rights will implement that once it, in my understanding from our we've been trying to figure out if there's any resistance, and very, very minimal resistance at state legislature level. So with that, I have to say it was a very sad part of American history.
Yeah, and I'd like to just really chime in real quick about this because this is something we've been, well, living with for over a century, and that these schools weren't by accident. They were by design, and there was over 360 of these schools across the United States and over 200 in Canada. And in Canada, they call them residential, and in the United States, they call them boarding, but they're the same institutions of forced assimilation where they were taking Native children as young as 3 and 4 years old and essentially making them non-Indian. And this idea of civilizing the savage started at contact. It just got stronger over time as tribes, got beat down. And so by the 1800s, the United States was in a position to put its will more forcefully on tribal communities to quote unquote civilize them. And the civilization process wasn't going as planned. So the plan changed to target children and families and to break them up. And this plan started, like I said, very early, but it got a lot of ground and teeth with federal funding and budgets and staff in the late 1880s. And these schools went throughout the country. And one of the last to close in the country was here in Michigan at the Holy Childhood of Jesus Indian Boarding School in 1983. So it's something I tread lightly on because I know of many survivors who went to the school. They're in our communities. They're with us to this day. And that's what makes Holy Childhood such an anomaly, is how late it went. And it's a complicated story. It's a twisted story. I talked to people who said they had good experiences, and then I talked to people who have had absolutely horrific, devastating experiences. Some people never made it out. They died at the schools. So it's really the story of the survivors a lot of times. But the system was there and it was in place for a very long time.
Thank you for sharing that heavy part of your history. The last question is for all three of you. How can the general public help our Native American neighbors the most? What would make life better for your people as you see it right now? What's the greatest need?
Who wants to go first? I guess I'll start. I think there's a big need is one, and it goes back to some of our teaching, is showing respect. I think a lot of times there's still a lot of disrespect. We just did a story over the weekend where out in Kansas, the commissioner of education, and for whatever reason, I'm not sure why he did this, but during a conference last month, or earlier this month on the 15th, he was talking to this town that had been devastated in 1991 by tornadoes. And then he brought up how the fact that his cousins who grew up in California, now he's in Kansas, right? He's the top educator there, the commissioner of education. Well, he relayed this story of how he told his cousins, tornadoes, you don't have to worry about getting killed. And I put in my own words, so I don't you can go to my story and you'll see it. But you don't have to worry about tornadoes. You have to worry about the raiding Indians who can come at any time. I mean, let's just suppose he said it a decade or 2 decades ago, 4 decades, whenever he was younger. I don't quite know how old he is, but the point is, here's the top educator talking like that. And the tribes there, including my tribe, is based in Mayetta, they called for his resignation. He submitted it, but the Board of Education rejected the letter of resignation, saying that the work that he's done has far exceeds this slip of the tongue. And I guess my point is that I'm not so sure it's just a slip of the tongue. This was something inside of him. Why in the world would he bring that out as a top educator? When I say we need to be showing respect, it should start at every single level of government, whether it's for the president of the United States, somebody in a local school board. They should respect who we are as Native people. Until we get that respect, we're going to keep having problems in this country as Native people. And there's a whole bunch of other areas, but that's my take.
Thank you, Levi. Kevin, you're next.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So it says, how can the general public help our Native American neighbors the most? You know, I do pre-pandemic, I did quite a bit of touring at schools around Canada, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, especially. And I noticed that all those schools, even though there's no Native kids in those schools at all, they always do that acknowledgement of whose lands that they're on. So it's just like every day those kids, and they're all different, Ukrainian or whatever they are, British or whatever their heritage, they all have that daily coming to their consciousness of that, the indigenous heritage of that land upon which they are. Now, granted, of course, in Canada especially, like you go to the prairie provinces and those, the indigenous population is, I think in Saskatchewan, has come close to 50% of the school-age population are First Nations now. So it's really an accelerating demographic. It doesn't really exist so much in the U.S. because, of course, in the U.S., the policy for several hundred years was total annihilation, total extermination of indigenous people, and then eventually became removal, but side to side with extermination. So it was largely successful. The places where it wasn't so successful was where I live in South Dakota, because we still have a lot of Indians, on the west side of the state where I live. Most of the schools are majority tribal members. So there's a significant population, but unfortunately, we're still at the same level that JFK mentioned in 1963. He described the American Indian as the least understood and the most misunderstood American. So I think we have a long ways to go to create this awareness, because I think for most John Q. Public or whoever it is in the US, there's never a time that anything indigenous penetrates into their consciousness. It doesn't come through. And you all right here are a notable exception to that, so that you have this interest. And that's the foundation right there. We have to start with you all, people like you all, who can create that awareness and expand upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Eric?
Yeah, big question. A lot of answers. Definitely, on the big level of government and then individual, I completely agree with Levi and Kevin that it takes, this type of relationship on all fronts. But I get this question, often too. And in my mind, it's land. You want to do something, protect a river or plant a tree, and maybe there's an endangered species around you. We had a real problem with bats a few years ago. They were dying off, and they're such an integral part of our ecosystem. And people came together and built bat houses and brought them back. So that's what I would encourage if you really want to do something and get the boots on the ground, so to speak, is get into the environmental fight, because if there's no clean environment, there's nothing. There's just absolutely nothing at all. So whether it's Standing Rock was such a huge moment where indigenous and non-indigenous people came together, over legal rights and water rights and human rights. But there's Standing Rocks all over the world, whether it's a mountain or a forest or wherever you live, there's some type of environmental battle going on as we speak. So that's what I would encourage if you really want to get in, because sometimes Native people can be a tough community to get into, for good reason. And that doesn't mean that they don't like you or you're unwelcome, but you got to look at the 500 years of history that Native people have had to deal with in terms of trust and relationships. And looking from a different perspective, wording's really important. I see this a lot in schools. When you talk about explorers or immigrants, and you flip it, from a native, it's an invader or a colonizer, but you have 500 years of this. So if you're not working directly with the people, work directly with the land.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great questions, really thoughtful responses. There are more questions we haven't gotten to. We will send those to our panelists and ask for them to send us short statements and replies so we can include that in the packet that everybody receives after tonight's town hall. I'm now going to move us into our breakout rooms. There is a facilitator assigned to each room. Our panelists have been randomly assigned to rooms. Everyone else is randomly assigned. The facilitator has the questions. The first one is, what did you learn? What surprised you tonight? And we'll give you 7 minutes to talk about that. When I first move you into rooms, right now they're all evenly distributed, but a few people I'm sure will drop out. And so you might be moved from a room. It might take a minute to settle everything down. So don't be too distressed if you get yanked out and put somewhere else. I'm going to open those rooms now and invite you to go into your breakout. Welcome back. I think all of our breakout groups are back, and I hope that was a fruitful conversation. We're going to move through a quick reporting. So each facilitator, if you could just give us one short example of an answer to number 3, what we can do, that would be most helpful. And we'll start with group 1 and Mary Jane.
Our group thought that one way we can be more welcoming is to take the advice of the panelists and continue learning, show respect, and care for the land, which includes giving land acknowledgements.
Excellent. Thank you, group number 1. How about group number 2, Mary?
Well, we had a young woman who is sitting on the Parks and Recreation for the county. And recently they have a park that they're looking at. And she thought it would be a good idea if there was a land acknowledgement statement on a plaque at the park. And I said, wouldn't that be a great idea for all the parks? So that when you go to a park in Ottawa County, we acknowledge that this is not our land.
Excellent.
Like
Excellent.
that.
Thank you. Thank you, group number 2. How about Holly in group number 3?
Yeah, overall, it was, we need to fight ignorance. We need to resist the direction things are going, where information is dumbed down. We need to speak up and have more conversations, more programs just like this, and get the word out.
Wonderful. Thank you, group number 3. How about group number 4, Jamie?
Hi. So one of the points that came out of our group is to slow down and enjoy our environment. Land is a gift to all as a center of community, not just as a commodity.
Thank you. Thank you, Group 4. How about Group 5, Caleb?
Yeah, the one big takeaway was correcting the false narrative. There seems to be a lot of stories going around that are not true and real, and we need to make sure that we are correcting those and being advocates for all.
Excellent. Thank you, Group 5. How about Group 6, Carolyn?
Hey, yeah, we kind of along Caleb's, but not exactly, but being really cognizant of the language that we use. For example, stop with the blaming and the deficit type language, such as saying things like, we don't know so much because they didn't keep good records. Well, we kind of took away their language, right? We broke them all up. So that was a good one.
Thank you. Thank you, Group 6. How about Group 7, Monica?
Sure. Our theme for question 3 certainly was to keep leaning in, tell the truth, keep having conversations, dismantling myths with our words, with our writing, keep pushing the truth, the facts, being open to neighbors. And then following up with Kyle Williams from Along Talks Words of White People Out Front to just keep white people standing with and as requested in front of people of color to keep pressing the truth and revealing the truth.
Excellent. Thank you, Group number 7. How about Group number 8, Jane? Jane Stopker, are you there?
I am right here. I'm so sorry. I got all
That's
caught up in reading all my great, we had great conversation. Sorry about that. I was like, oh, okay. But we just talked about teaching our children, making sure that they're understanding, thinking of the generation, the way the natives also, look to their elders for information, but also how important it is to talk to those younger for future and about caring for our earth. How can we do it? And ways to start small sometimes, planting a garden, composting, breaking up eggshells. I mean, it was just, there's so much, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Group 8. And Group 9, Emily.
Thank you. One of the great suggestions that we had out of our group was to, raise these issues with the government, whether that's at a local level with a municipality or the county, or state or federal. Make sure that it continues to be a public focus so that it can receive attention and action.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Group 9. If facilitators, please make sure that you send your notes for all of those questions over so that we can review those at our debriefing and look for other action items. And Levi, I want to follow up with you too and talk about the panel that we talked about around mental health, if there's a way we can help make that happen. I
Yes.
think, yeah, let's certainly follow up on that. We have some post polls that I want to ask right now. The first one is a revisit of the question about how prevalent is racism in the community, and then how comfortable are you talking about race now compared to when you started started this town hall? The same, more comfortable, or less comfortable? If you just take a moment to answer these questions and hit submit. We'll leave those up for a few more seconds. I see lots of answers coming in. It's very helpful to get this information. I appreciate your participation. And we'll close this in about 5 seconds. Last chance. Okay, showing you the results. Get a take on how prevalent we believe racism is And 60% of our participants feel more comfortable talking about race than they did before we started the conversation. That's really nice to see. Next question has to do with your evaluation of this town hall. How helpful? Was it helpful? Did it make you more aware? Did it motivate you to take action? Or did it convince you to become or continue as a leader? So thinking in terms of a scale of how helpful this was. If you would choose all of those that apply. Okay, and everyone answered that. Let me share those results. 27% more aware, 42% motivated to take action, and 52% wanting to continue or begin as a leader. The next one is about those, another town hall. So as we continue our series, would you be interested in additional town halls on race and racism? And if so, what topics would you like addressed? Organizations that are addressing racism, historical instances of racism in the Tri-Cities, local government actions and reactions, local businesses and the economics of race, implicit bias, white privilege, racism in healthcare, or racism and mental health care. And you could choose all that apply. As those answers come in.
My questions never showed up on the screen on that one.
They didn't. All right, I'll follow up with you on that then. These are the answers that that did come through. We had everybody saying they would participate in another town hall, and that historical instances of racism in the Tri-Cities had the largest vote, and then local government actions and reactions. And then we just have one more, and this is about actions that you're willing to take. So Kevin, was that you that said that it didn't show up, the last one?
That was me, but my answers would have been pretty much in line with, they wouldn't have affected your statistics. So
Okay, okay. And are you seeing this question?
I did.
Okay. So what actions are you willing to take now? Reading, listening, watching to learn more, engaging in more conversations about race and racism, engaging in conversations with people from a different race than you, getting additional training from a long talk, supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at school or at work, attending implicit bias training, getting involved in local government, donating to a group that's working for racial justice, joining the community book club on race and racism, or inviting other people to this series of town hall meetings. And again, you can pick all that apply, but an opportunity to talk about a specific action that you're willing to take at this point. And I'll leave that up for just a few more seconds. And end and share. So the largest one here, 89% want to continue having conversations with people of another race, 87% just having the conversations about race, and 74% interested in supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at their school and workplace. So very encouraging. Oh, and 79% reading, listening, watching, and learning more. So I encourage you all to follow up with those recommendations, with the actions that you've said you'd like to take. Please take those and then please share them. In terms of next steps from the Anti-Racism Task Force, we will be sending this recording, the slides, materials. I know that there were different websites that were listed in the chat box. We'll make sure all of that gets sent to you. We'll also be sending the remaining questions to our panelists, and as we get their answers, we'll include those in the packet. We like to have this out by the end of the week, so hopefully we'll get those responses in the next couple of days. And then we will be reviewing all of the small group conversation, looking for opportunities for the task force to take on other action plans ourselves. What can we do? What are our next steps? I encourage you to go to the same place that you registered for this town hall and note what you have read or watched and how it impacted you. Report on an action. There's a place you can also support the county's DEI initiatives and lend your voice to that important work. Also want to remind you the Civil Rights Road Trip is coming up in April, and March 15th is the deadline. So if you've been thinking about it, the deadline is just a couple of weeks away. Go ahead and make that commitment. And our next town hall will be March 28th, so the fourth Monday of the month, 6:30, and we'll be talking about redlining. Now I have our thank yous. Just really so deeply grateful for our astounding panelists today. Each and every one of you. I want to go out and have lunch and or dinner and just spend about 3 hours or a day just talking to you and listening to your stories and your wisdom. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Levi. Thank you, Kevin. Your participation has just been invaluable. I also want to thank all of the members of the Anti-Racism Task Force. I want to thank all of our facilitators tonight, our Joanne, who was keeping time, and Mary Jane, who helped with questions. Again, we couldn't do this without all of your assistance. And as you're out in the community and you interact with any of these organizations, please let them know how much you appreciate their support of this kind of initiative. Until next time, the divine in me recognizes and bows to the divine in you. Namaste.